That's all the time we have for news right now. Let's turn to our interview with Ron Paul, former congressman, and talk about the American power structure. We're joined by John Cohn.
Ron, there's an old statement I've read and heard about people saying in Congress, the banks never lose.
Well, I think that's a general statement. I think the big bankers never lose. But I think a little banker right now is losing a lot because a lot of little bankers are getting closed down. The big banks are gobbling them up. I don't think David Rockefeller is going to lose. I don't think he's going to be out selling apples or pushing pencils anytime soon. But a lot of bankers that are being wiped out at the state level are losing. But the big banking power structure seems to have control because they're on the inside and they have control of money and they know what policy is going to be down the road.
Can you specify this structure, you're talking about this power structure?
Well, the power structure basically is made up of a lot of very powerful business and corporate leaders in the country. And in particular, they have formed their organizations. They've been around for a good while, and they don't even hide it anymore. You know, the Trilateral Commission, as well as the Council of Foreign Relations. No matter which president, which party is in power, they will appoint to the major offices members of these two committees. And they always have control of the Federal Reserve System. So the Wall Streeters, the big bankers, have inside information as far as what is happening and what's going on. And control over money is pretty significant because if you can control money, you're really controlling 1/2 of every single transaction. So that is a tremendous amount of power. But it doesn't look like we're going to have any independence. They say the Federal Reserve is independent, but that's a bunch of nonsense. The protection that the founders gave us to try to keep us from this happening never authorized a central bank, and they were very strict in the writing of the Constitution to limit the power of Congress to the minting of gold coins, to allowing only gold and silver to be legal tender, and prohibiting the printing of paper money. All those things we have failed to follow. And that's why we have a central bank with a paper money system and a lot of inflation, high interest rates, and a very, very shaky economy. So I would say that if we would have followed the advice of the Founding Fathers and not allowed this power structure, this group of elitist bankers and industrialists to get control not only of the banking system and the monetary system, but really our foreign policy and our government. I wrote a little speech and gave a speech right before I left Congress, and I said I don't think the members of Congress really know how little effect they have in controlling things. Really, and that means that the Congress itself doesn't have much control. The people doesn't have much they don't have much to say about it either. The control of overall policy is really in the hands of a very small number of people who control all the administrations, all the appointments to cabinets, and certainly all the appointments to the Federal Reserve.
So that shows we have a single-party political system in the United States, just maybe split in two a little bit, but there's really no difference.
It's a single party, and if you look at the obstacles put in our way as libertarians to get on ballots, it's an outrage because we have to spend more than 1/3 of our energies and our monies just to apply to get on state ballots, and this distracts us. Some states it's almost impossible to get on. They say, and I have not personally investigated every law around the world, but they say that we are one of the toughest countries in the world to get a new party system. And American people have been conditioned that it's great to have two parties. We don't want to be like Italy where there's all these choices. We want to limit our choices. It's easier that way.
And we don't want to be like the Soviet Union where there's only one party.
Yeah, that's right. So they have two. But if policies never change, what's the difference? So we do have one party. There's policies never change. You know, if there would have been a difference, maybe under the Republicans we would have had closer to a balanced budget, but the deficits were worse with the Republicans. But foreign policy, the policy of intervention, subsidizing communism, and helping rich allies, that always continues, Republicans and Democrats. It was the same policy, Republican or Democrat, that supported wars like Korea and Vietnam, and the CIA operations and the FBI. All these operations are endorsed by the other two parties. But for that reason, what do? They get control of the funding as well. The other two parties get over $100 million handed to them. You know, not too long ago, we had the two conventions on national television, Republican and Democratic convention. And the American people didn't watch. They should have. They paid for it. They paid $9 million. We as citizens were forced to pay to run those conventions, $9 million apiece, and therefore they get all this exposure, making it, again, very difficult for an option, a third option, to be heard. It's very hard to get our message out. But the control is there, whether it's in the political control or the banking control or in government policy control in the administrations.
I want to touch, if I may, just on your comment a moment ago about the parting speech that you left with your colleagues in Congress. You were there for 4 terms, and I think are aware of the general level of awareness of your colleagues in Congress at that time. Do they really not know that that all of this is going on, that the power structure is there, unseen, but really manipulating the strings?
Most of them don't know. Most of them are suspicious that the problems are more serious than they would never ever admit publicly, but they don't understand the policies. I've had a lot of members on the banking committee come up and ask me questions. How does the Federal Reserve System work? What are special drawing rights? What is the IMF? And they'll do that quietly because they haven't really studied it. So most of them are naive, but very much aware that there's some serious problems. But if you get somebody at the head of a committee that's been around for 30 years or so, I think that they know very much what's happening. They're very much attuned to what's happening, and I don't think they get that far. I don't think they get to head of a committee unless they've more or less been accepted, by the power structure.
I did a study, or just a quick look, a few years ago after reading the Joint Economic Report of the Joint Economic Committee in Congress. And reading it, it looked like it came right out of the Trilateral Commission. It looked all the little buzzwords that the Trilateral Commission reports had, all the things that the Trilateral Commission wanted. So I looked to see if in the memberships of organizations of these congressmen and senators, and sure enough, almost every one of them are a member of Trilateral Commission or Bilderberger or Council on Foreign Relations.
I can remember having a conversation with Barbara Conable one day.
Yes, he's a biggie in the power sector.
And he was complaining about, there's people always complaining about me belonging to the Trilateral Commission. He was complaining to me, and lo and behold, it was Barbara Conable, but as soon as he resigned from Congress, where did he end up? The head of the World Bank. Right. I left Congress. I studied the banking system. I understand something about the money. They haven't called me yet for one of those appointments. No. I've been waiting at the telephone, waiting for them to appoint me.
Well, John, you've studied a lot on this banking industry structure, and it's not only interlocked here, but there are international interlocks, aren't there?
Yes, there are, and the ties with the foreign banking interest. The people that settled this country left. Of course, Europe came over here and settled down, and almost immediately the powers that be in the European continent and the money circles were reaching out those tentacles to gain control of the new country here. And that struggle has continued. We see it, and who shall control our currency? They struggled back between Jefferson. And as a matter of fact, I have a quote from Jefferson that I think is very pertinent to our discussion here. If the American people ever allow the banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children will wake up homeless on the continent their fathers